Hello. Okay, been told to hold this against my chin. I'm not very good at these, so sorry if you came to see my chin tonight. You're not going to. So thank you for having me, YLD. For those of you that don't know me, I am a content design and design systems consultant based here in the UK. I've worked on design systems for these companies, for gov.uk, for Babylon Health, RIP, for BT, which also includes EE and PlusNet, for Springer Nature, for the Wellcome Trust, and most recently for Camden Council. And I could probably say some quite interesting things about the different kind of organisational models for these design systems, or different documentation strategies, or kind of lessons that I've learned about doing this work with all of these different companies. But I'm not going to do that. Instead, I've decided to talk to you about burnout. Hands up if you're burnt out. Okay, about half of you. Congratulations to the rest of you for being under 25. So, a couple of months ago, I saw a designer called Christine Velour talking about responsive design. And in the talk, she introduced a German concept that I hadn't heard of before, called Sisyphusarbeit, which I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of, so I'm sorry if you're German. And if you're not familiar with the story of Sisyphus, I will explain. So in Greek mythology, Sisyphus was a king who was punished in the afterlife for his deceitfulness. And his eternal punishment was to roll a large boulder up a hill, only to have it roll back down every time that it reached the top. So this task was repetitive and futile and never-ending and ultimately meaningless effort. And I realised that this was just about the most accurate description that I'd ever heard of a career in design systems. Now, full disclosure, I am currently giving you this talk from the depths of my very own personal burnout. It's been a pretty trying year this year for reasons that I won't go into here, but to quote Succession, any Succession fans? Yes? It's been quite the shit show at the fuck factory. Am I allowed to swear? Hopefully so. With that said, it's not the first time that I've had these thoughts about design systems work, and actually this came up earlier today. So at last year's Converge conference in London, I compared those of us working on design systems to salmon swimming upstream against a powerful current of opposing forces that seem determined to drag us back towards our start point. And the thing is that I know I'm not the only one who feels this way. So when I talk to colleagues and friends working in the industry, I hear one reflection over and over again. This shit is exhausting. And recently I started to think about why this is. So what is it about design systems work in particular that leads so many of us feeling really depleted and burnt out? Is it kind of the context that we're working in? Is it something to do with the nature of the work? Or is it something inherent in those of us who are drawn to this work that demands systems thinking, that makes us more kind of vulnerable to burnout? And more importantly, is there actually anything we can do about it? Because the bottom line is that as much as I do find this work exhausting, I also actually quite like it. I just wish that it was easier. And I think that's probably true for a lot of you too, because otherwise why would you be here on a Thursday night listening to talks about design systems? So in the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you some reflections about design systems and burnout and some ideas about what might make it better. So the word burnout gets chucked about quite a lot, and I want to start off with a definition to make sure that we're all on the same page. So the term burnout was first coined by a psychologist called Herbert Freudenberger in 1975, and he characterized it by these three components. So the first one was emotional exhaustion, which is the fatigue that comes from caring too much for too long. The second one was depersonalization, so the depletion of empathy, caring, and compassion. And finally, we have a decreased sense of accomplishment, so an unconquerable sense of futility and a feeling that nothing you do makes any difference, which is the Sisyphusarbeit bit. You okay there? And when it comes to design systems, I think it's this third component that is the thing that kind of most commonly leads us to burnout. So why is that? Well, I think there are sort of 5 main reasons that design systems can contribute to a decreased sense of accomplishment that leads to burnout. And they are that we and the organisations that we work for tend to overvalue outputs over outcomes. Design systems are viewed as static products and not living services. Design system value is actually really hard to quantify in the way that's expected. We hear a lot more about our failures than our successes. And lastly, we care far too much about far too much. So I'm going to talk through each one of these points, starting at the top. So overvaluing outputs over outcomes. Now, as the design system space has matured, something that I've noticed is that we've worked really hard to try and converge on this kind of standard definition of what they are. And in doing this, we've started to treat them like a checklist of things to deliver. So as a result of this, I see this kind of overemphasis on artifacts and deliverables, so things that you can sort of point at the expense of what they really are, which is organisational practices. And one common way that I see this manifesting is in a phenomenon that I kind of see in design system teams happening over and over, something that I have started to call the post-launch crash. Now, pre-launch design systems are typically galvanized towards a shared and specific aim. Launch the design system. And during this phase, the team has its eyes on a shared prize, and any and all work and discussions and disagreements and stresses and detours happen in the warm glow of a very bright light at the end of the tunnel. However hard things are now, we think, it will all be worth it in the end. I've lived through this myself. So this is a picture of me and the team at GDS the day that we launched the GovUK design system. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this was probably the best day of my career. So 18 months of research, design and redesign and documenting and testing and iterating and failing and eventually passing our funding review all came to fruition on this day. The relief was palpable, and it was only really surpassed by the pride that I felt at what we'd managed to achieve. And any exhaustion that I felt in that moment was swept away in this kind of flurry of excitement and recognition and glory, and it was indeed all worth it in the end. But what I know now, and what's so obvious with hindsight, is that the launch wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a much harder, endless, relentless, and more difficult journey. That light at the end of the tunnel turned out to be nothing more but the entrance to another one. And for many design system teams, it's the only light that they ever get. So giddy from this kind of euphoric moment of going live, many design systems teams kind of breeze confidently into this post-launch land, ready to kind of bask in the glory of their efforts as teams start to adopt the design system and incorporate it into their day-to-day work. But unfortunately, it's at this point, as teams start to kind of kick the proverbial tires of what we've done and stakeholders start to ask what's next, that we often come to realize that the people in our organization have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of what we're offering. Demand surges, and we are bombarded with reports of gaps in our system, and stakeholders start to question whether our team even needs to exist anymore now that we've built the thing that they were expecting. And this leads me straight into the second reason that I think design systems can cause burnout, which is that they're seen as static products and not living services. So although awareness of design systems has matured significantly over the past decade or so, a continued sticking point seems to be around the organisational need for ongoing investment. And this is absolutely not helped by external agencies and consultants, and I do my very best not to be one of them, who promise to come in and build you a design system. As an aside, if you are an agency or a consultant who does this, please, on behalf of in-house teams across the land, stop. It is like promising to build a national rail services without thinking about who's going to drive the trains once the tracks are in place. Design systems are a continuous service that come with ongoing operational costs. But the idea that design systems are a single point deliverable is a pervasive myth that just won't die. And I know that I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but I think that there are two aspects to this that can contribute to burnout. So the first is that product teams using the design system will often place unrealistic demands on a design system team to provide everything that they need from day one. As design system makers and maintainers, we know that our systems will grow and evolve over time, and that the gap between what teams need and what we're able to offer them will shrink as the system matures. That rather than solving every need from day one, our task is to reduce duplication of effort as time goes on. But for people who've never worked on a design system, this is not always as obvious as it is to us. So rather than viewing the design system as a living entity with ever-increasing returns, they focus on the gaps. And this leaves us facing a fire hose of demand that can make us feel as though nothing we're doing is ever enough. I'm going to talk about that in a few more minutes. But the second problem that this misconception causes is that it creates a threat to our funding. Stakeholders who misunderstand the sort of evolutionary nature of design systems can assume that once we've shipped version 1, we are no longer needed. And budget holders who don't understand the need for us to provide ongoing support and to run processes like contribution are quick to assume that they can reallocate our time to matters that they consider more pressing. And no matter how many times we explain how things really work, this misunderstanding seems quite persistent, and it leaves us in the position of having to constantly defend ourselves and prove our worth. So the constant need to explain why we are doing what we're doing and why it's valuable is exhausting, and it really feeds into this feeling of futility that nothing we do is ever enough. It's also really challenging, and this leads me on to the third reason for design systems burnout, which is that design systems value is hard to quantify. Even in organisations with the most supportive and trusting leadership, it's not enough to just say, trust us. Eventually, someone is going to say, prove it. And despite a lot of articles and conference talks and regular discussions with each other on how to effectively measure the impact of design systems, most of us still find this really hard to do. And I think there's a few reasons for this. For starters, it's actually relatively easy to gather qualitative feedback on the value of our design system, so things like testimonials and anecdotal benefits from people who use the system and like it. But the trouble is that it's often not what the business really wants from us. Because what stakeholders actually mean when they say prove it is prove it with numbers. So if it's money that you want, give me something that I can attach a clear cost to. And when it comes to gathering quantitative data, there are sort of two areas that we can look at, and neither is particularly straightforward. So the first one is we can look at our impact on the user experience of the products that the design system is used to create. So we might ask things like, have we helped to increase conversion? Has our customer satisfaction score improved? Has engagement gone up? Are product updates happening more regularly now? But this presents a real challenge for us with design system teams because our impact on the end user experience is nearly always diluted and mixed in with other factors like product teams, delivery processes, the efficacy of other systems and tools that the teams use, the overall health of the design and development culture and operations in the organization. And so pinpointing really to any degree of accuracy a design system's impact on quantitative product metrics is often an unwinnable game, but it is also often one that we're asked to play anyway. So our second option is to collect metadata about the design system. So things like the number of teams who are adopting the design system, or the number of components used, or the percentage of products built using the design system. And these things are definitely easier to measure, but they are only really meaningful if stakeholders fundamentally believe in the value of the system already. Because nobody really cares about the whole company using something that they don't see the point in. This isn't an easy problem to solve, and to my knowledge, no one has found a universal formula for persuading stakeholders to keep the money coming in. If you have, please come and find me after this and we will make a lot of money together. So the best we can really do is kind of understand what our organisation cares about and build up a picture that taps into that. But it's not much fun, is it? Making the case for continued funding is difficult and tiresome, and probably not really why most of us got into this work. but it's inescapable. And again, I know that I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but I do think that it's worth acknowledging because it all contributes again to this decreased sense of accomplishment. This can make it feel like we're speaking a different language to our stakeholders and our users. So we might know that what we're doing is valuable, and we might know that we're working as hard as we can, but if we can't tell that story in the way that people want to hear it, then it feels like nothing we're doing is ever good enough. And this connects to the fourth reason that I think design systems cause burnout, which is that we hear way more about our failures than our success. I often hear people describing design systems work as thankless, and I definitely understand where that comes from. As design system maintainers, we are providing a service to the organisation, and as with any service, people are way more likely to tell us when we're getting it wrong than when we're getting it right. This is completely normal, but somehow it feels more personal when your customers are also your colleagues. I think that subconsciously we sort of expect fellow designers and developers to take time to give us good feedback. So the fact that they know on some level what it's like to do our jobs makes their silence on our successes feel kind of inhumane. And this is where I'm going to say something a bit strange. You know how they say no news is good news? If we apply to design systems, then we can assume that that means that no feedback means that everything is working as expected, and our users are also satisfied. I also think, in the case of design systems, that bad news is also good news. And that's because since the vast majority of design systems are not mandated, we are reliant on teams in the organisation choosing to use them over alternatives like creating their own product level solutions, or in the worst cases, even setting up their own local design systems. So when teams come to us with feedback like, well, this header component only has space for 4 items, but we have 5, or your focus states don't work properly in Safari, or I tried to contribute a pattern, but nobody responded to me, or we use a different theme on this part of the site and your design system doesn't support it. I see it as a sign that they're engaged and on some level that they are invested in its success. If they're taking the time to tell us how to make the system better, it's because they want it to be better, right? They want to use it. Or at least rationally, that's what I do. But the problem is, I'm not a robot. We are not robots. And so however our logical brains might process this as a positive indication, we are human beings and we're doing our best, and constant criticism doesn't feel very nice. And this creates an unfortunate paradox. As engagement and buy-in and usage of the system increases, so too does the amount of criticism and, kind of constructive or otherwise criticism that we receive. And that means that the more impactful our design system is, the more we're going to hear about its shortcomings. Our success is going to make us feel like we're failing almost by design. As well as being kind of demoralizing, it also makes it really hard to prioritize work. Because when goodwill and trust is our currency for encouraging adoption, it makes it really hard to just put these issues on ice. And this leads me on to the fifth and final reason that I'm going to share that I think design systems cause burnout, which is that we care too much about too much. As systems thinkers, we are hardwired to keep our eye on the big picture and all of the problems that that picture contains. And this creates a couple of issues that can significantly erode our sense of progress. So firstly, we understand that our design systems are made up of lots of interconnected parts, and that even seemingly small decisions that we make can have consequences for its overall health. We know that design systems are multipliers, and so a single design choice that we make can quickly get scaled across multiple products, and if we get it wrong, then rolling back on that choice creates widespread disruption to adopting teams and can weaken trust with our connection and our kind of relationship to those teams. And that's a really heavy load to bear. And in my experience, this tends to make us quite cautious and fairly risk averse, meaning that we often want to take our time to really build confidence in our decisions before we make any updates. And that's not a bad thing. To some degree, I think design system teams need to move at a slower pace than their product counterparts because of the scope and the scale of their work. But it can go too far. I've worked in teams where we've as good as kind of ground to a halt because we're too scared of making a misstep. When we see every move as having potentially far-reaching, disastrous consequences, we stop making progress. And another problem that we face is that being aware of all of the problems also means being aware of all the problems that you're not solving. So the breadth of the work that we're doing means that there is pretty much an endless supply of problems and issues to fix and improvements to make. And I do think that as systems thinkers, we are especially empathetic and especially sensitive to the pain of knowing that we have to say no, even though sometimes we know it's necessary. Oh God, spoiler. So even if we know that we can't be everything to everyone, I think we're kind of hardwired to want to. And in fact, I'd say it's the very qualities that make us good at our jobs. So our empathy, our problem-solving skills, and our ability to hold the whole picture in mind that makes us so vulnerable to burnout. And it makes me think of this meme that you'll pretend you haven't just seen. Do what you love, and you'll work super fucking hard all the time with no separation or any boundaries, and also take everything extremely personally. I'm in this meme. And this worries me because I think that for many of us, it's the thing that kind of attracts us to this work in the first place. So the desire to help people and to have an impact and to make a difference that can often end up driving us out of it. So is it any wonder, given all that, that we are burnt out, given that, to summarize, that we overvalue outputs over outcomes, making it feel like we're facing a never-ending checklist of things to deliver, and that our design systems are seen as static products and not living services, and this creates unrealistic pressure to have every problem solved from day one. Given that design system value is hard to quantify, it's hard for us to tell our story in the right way, which can make it feel like what we're doing is never enough. That we hear more about our failures than our success, so it feels like we're never really getting anything right. And given that we just fundamentally care too much about too much, wishing that we could solve all of the problems and be kind of painfully aware of everything that we can't fix. So on that really cheerful note, is there anything we can do about it? I've just spent the last few minutes or so kind of making the case that design systems are destined to burn us out. So is there actually anything to be done, or should we all just quit right now? Well, you could quit. Although, if anyone is here with their boss, could you just wait a couple of days so it doesn't look like it was my fault? Now, you might think I'm being sarcastic here, and it would be quite on brand for me, but I am being deadly serious. I want to validate that it is very okay to walk away from this work for a time or forever. I have taken a break before, and I think at some point I'll probably do it again. And design systems, contrary to how we sometimes feel about them, are not life. Right? You existed before you worked on a design system. You will continue to exist afterwards. And yes, you absolutely could quit and pursue a different path. But for many of you, the benefits of this work will still outweigh its drawbacks. So if we do decide to stay, then can we better protect ourselves against burnout, and how? Do you remember how at the start of this talk I said that I thought that the key to design systems burnout lay in that third component defined by Herbert Freudenberger, so that decreased sense of accomplishment? Given that, I think this is also where we can look for solutions. So to really counter the risk of burnout, we have to cultivate a sense of accomplishment. So what does this look like in practice? Burnout is really complex and it can be really hard to come out of. So I don't have a silver bullet for you, unfortunately, but I do have some suggestions about where we can start. 4, to be exact. We can tell better stories. We can radically de-scope. We can celebrate success often, and we can reconnect to our purpose. So let's go through each one of those in turn and look at how, starting with telling a better story. So I think we have to start being more honest about what design systems are and what they offer and what they're not. And this is especially important at the pitching stage when we're telling leadership how money our design systems will save the business when we're no longer throwing the company's money down the drain, building buttons over and over again. We like to tell stakeholders that design systems will make duplication of effort a thing of the past, and that we talk about this in a kind of very binary way, and we say, we're going to save the organisation millions and millions of pounds with common components. But the reality is that while a well-maintained design system will gradually reduce duplication of effort over time, it will never completely stop it from happening. And that's because not every component or pattern will be provided on day one. Not every team will consume the design system on day one. And fundamentally, because divergence and experimentation is part of the design process, and it will never completely go away, and that's okay. We also need to move away from the language of single point delivery. So rather than promising to build a design system, we need to over-communicate the reality of this work, which is that design systems are about using tools and processes and improving inter-organizational relationships to make design and development more efficient. This work is an ongoing practice, and by communicating it in this way, we take the pressure off that launch moment and we set better expectations. And this might be a harder sell than an oversimplified sales pitch that says a design system will save 25% of a company's design and development costs, but it will put us in a much better position to show off the value that we do deliver. So let's move on to radical de-scoping. Now, Coco Chanel famously said, before you leave the house, look in the mirror and take one thing off. And I think we can take inspiration for this when it comes to design systems with a slight adjustment. Before you share your roadmap, look at your objectives and take almost every fucking thing off. In my experience, we perpetually overcommit, and we have to start getting better at this. So when we're goal setting for design systems, it's a good idea to think about which users we most need to support, which products we most need to serve, which platforms we most need to accommodate, and finally, and most importantly, what we can't commit to. It's a really good idea to regularly revisit these, at least every quarter, and to be really vigilant against scope creep. Because if I've learned one thing from 7 years of working in this space, it's that your capacity is always less than you think. And on the subject of goal setting, I know this isn't a very sexy hot take, but honestly, fuck moonshots. Moonshots came straight from the capitalism playbook, and I hate them. I hate aiming for an unattainable vision. All it does is just wear us down. And the thing about setting achievable goals is that you actually get to feel a sense of achievement rather than thinking about all the things that you didn't manage to do. And on that note, something else that we can do to shift that emphasis is to celebrate success often. We can all help, wherever we sit in our teams and our organizations, to help to cultivate a culture of appreciation within our teams by acknowledging each other's wins and calling out good work. So it's really simple, but I'm a really big fan of making sure there's always space in team retros to talk about what has gone well. So when you're in a retro, if you're running a retro, do contribute to this. It's so easy to go into the room with a list of things that you want to improve, but it's equally important to acknowledge what you and your colleagues are getting right. I'm also a big fan of the practice of honouring our achievements with cake. So here is an example of a lovely showstopper that I made for the WK Design System team when we shipped a bunch of accessibility updates on our first anniversary. And maybe this just seems like a small, insignificant thing, but it really does pay to take the time to mark your successes and to just look in the rearview mirror from time to time and say, yeah, we did good. Have some sugar.
Very fun.
And don't just keep it to yourself. Spam Slack with your design system updates. Do a weekly roundup of everything that you've done that week and bask in the dopamine hits that you get as people react with emojis and a torrent of cut and pasted well dones. Really feel the love in those. And it may all sound like I'm being a little bit flippant here, but celebrating success reminds us to have fun in our work. And I found that its effect is cumulative. Celebrating our wins, even the small ones, allows us to top up our emotional bank account. It helps to counteract the burnout that depletes us. So do make time for it, even if it seems frivolous. And the final piece of advice I want to share with you today is to reconnect to your purpose. And this is maybe the most important one for me. Design systems have taken on a life of their own. They were once a means to an end, but they have now become the end itself. So organisations no longer talk in general terms about wanting to improve efficiency or make things more consistent. They simply say, we need a design system. But design systems are not one thing, and no matter how many dickhead consultants like me might try and sell you an out-of-the-box approach, there is no template solution. Approaching design systems in a formulaic way leaves us with a checklist of artifacts to deliver, and it means that we lose sight of our purpose and why we're doing this work in the first place. But to really feel that sense of accomplishment that's so important for counteracting burnout, we need to connect to our purpose, both on a personal level and on a team level. So individually, why did you start working in this space in the first place? What itches did it let you scratch? For me, personally, I really care about creating more inclusive experiences and helping people to connect with each other, and design systems are just my current best way of doing that. So when I feel burnt out, reminding myself of the decisions that I've made and the work that I've done to this end along the way kind of helped me to realise that I am making a difference, even if it feels like I'm not. And what motivates you and your colleagues as a collective? So what is it that gets you all fired up? What kind of work gives you meaning? And what unites you as a team and gives you a shared sense of purpose? What makes you feel like part of something bigger? And this bit, I think, is key. I believe that both the best and worst things about design systems are that they connect us to something bigger than ourselves. The reach that we have sitting in design system teams can feel like a really heavy burden sometimes, but it also helps us to see the things that connect us together. And this is where I want to leave you today. Burnout in general sucks, and if you are in this room, then the unfortunate truth is that the career path that you've chosen and the type of person that you likely are means that you're probably at a slightly greater risk of burning out than the average. But if I can offer you a word of comfort, it's that you are not alone in that. Design systems are a collective thing. Did you see me taking this earlier? None of you look at the camera. So I know that when I'm struggling with burnout, a huge part of what pulls me back out of it is the community around me. So all of you lot and all the others who aren't here. So as system thinkers, I believe that we are intrinsically smart and capable and empathetic and compassionate people, and our community is one of the strongest tools in our arsenal. We are collectively a real force to be reckoned with. And before the urge for me to break into a terrible rendition of You'll Never Walk Alone fully overtakes me, I'll just leave you with one reminder. You have got this, and we've all got you. Thank you.